Hi everyone, my name is Brianna, and for my presentation I have chosen to focus on eating disorders and their psychological effects on the human mind and body. And I have chosen to talk about this specific psychological disorder for this presentation because not only is it one of the major psychological issues America is facing as a whole today, I think it is severely misunderstood, and in some cases certain kinds of disorders such as anorexia and bulimia are somewhat glorified, not by those names, but I think the idea of them are kind of misconstructed, and I will talk about that later on in the presentation. But to start, I want to describe what an eating disorder is. And from an article written by Angela Guarda from the American Psychology Association, eating disorders are behavioral conditions characterized by severe and persistent disturbance in eating behaviors and associated distressing thoughts and emotions. And so eating disorders affects all all kinds of individuals. Like, there's not a specific set, like different kind of disorders that would have a predisposition to it, where eating disorders kind of have a predisposition to it. Like, if somebody in your family had an eating disorder, you might see that and be more likely to develop one, or you're more at risk if you were bullied for your weight, whether that be you were too skinny or too fat, or you just didn't fit the ideal body type at the time. But it affects all kinds of individuals based on their social status, their age, their race. And I believe that it is not just a relationship that is unhealthy with food. I think a lot of times there's a misconception around eating disorders where it's just, oh, that person eats too much, they're just binge eating because they're bored or they're like not emotionally okay. But it's more of the idea that food consumes your life, and you either need to participate in behaviors that, such as like focusing on calorie counting, and that becomes like, oh, you can't eat more even when you're hungry, or it's just this very complex like mental illness, and it does result in very destructive behaviors, and those are rooted in like issues with self-worth and needing to control like every aspect of that life. And not only does it start to affect your physical health, it starts to affect your social relationships. Like, when you're unhappy with yourself and how you look, like, you start to believe that other people are going to be unhappy with how you look and judge you for that, so you don't go outside as much and deal with those social things. And I find it so interesting how like different disorders can develop. Not interesting, that's sad, but like how it develops. So you can develop social anxiety from like having an eating disorder and struggling with those ideas of like your mental health. But to further go on into the topic of what an eating disorder is, there are different types of eating disorders. So the first eating disorder I would like to talk about is bulimia, and that is been categorized as binge eating followed by purging. So purging is the act of trying to get it all out of your system, trying to either throw it up or have a laxative so that way you use the bathroom more often, and it tries to avoid the feeling of like overeating or feeling that guilt while still eating. So a lot of people who suffer from bulimia will eat, and they will have other people not like notice that they're not eating as much, and they'll throw it all up afterwards so that way they can maintain the body weight that they want. Similarly to bulimia is a binge eating disorder, where a person will eat like normal or they will overeat, but it's not followed by purging. So with a binge eating disorder, like, I know I struggle a little bit with that. I don't think it's super serious, but well, no, I don't think it's super serious, but I think I haven't been diagnosed for it, but I show a lot of symptoms of it. And from my personal experience and from what I've seen when researching, it is a lot of times categorized as just emotional eating, which can be true. Like, I do tend to eat when I get emotional, like, or when I'm feeling very stressed, or it's just something I can control and it makes me feel better because I'm eating good food. Like, if I'm eating good food, but it's not followed by purging. So a person that has a binge eating disorder tends to gain weight, other than the other types of eating disorders where they tend to lose a lot of weight. And I personally think that a binge eating disorder is not talked about enough. I feel like we talk a lot about bulimia and anorexia because it's a very noticeable, drastic difference in someone being overweight to being super skinny and like they lost all that weight, and like it's very noticeable. But I think it's also very noticeable when a person gains weight very rapidly from eating like a lot and putting a lot into their system. And I feel like it's not talked about as much because the ideal body weight is typically skinny. So when a person is like deemed fat, they're just deemed fat. Like, it doesn't matter how they got there, it doesn't matter what kind of disorder they are struggling with, it's just they're fat and they need to lose weight. And I think it hurts the people that have a binge eating disorder because it's like their struggle doesn't matter. But that's enough on that. Anorexia is another type of an eating disorder, and it is the act of purging that we talked about before, of that vomiting or starving yourself without eating. So people who suffer from anorexia feel like no matter what they put in their body, they will not be able to get it out, so they just avoid that in general, and they will starve themselves or count calories, which is very similar to the next disorder I'm going to talk about. But or they over exercise like crazy just so they can get those calories that they took in off, and that one leads to the most rapid pace of losing weight very quickly. And it's one of the most dangerous ways to lose weight. And the last one that I didn't put on the visual aid, but because it kind of overlaps with all of them, is when you avoid food or when you have a very restrictive diet, so you feel like you cannot eat certain foods because it has too many carbs or anything. And while that's normal to make it like healthy, like to make sure like you're eating a healthy amount, it's when you overdo it and you take none of that, or you eat food with no nutritional value, and it could go both ways of the gaining weight and losing weight. So the history of eating disorders. The symptoms of eating disorders have existed since early 700 BCE in ancient Rome. There was, when I was researching, I saw things about how women used to purge their entire bodies and starve themselves as an act of religious piety. Like, they would see it as like that was their beauty standard, and it was more for themselves and for their religious views rather than how it is today with beauty standards. But a couple of important dates specifically about the types of disorders is 1874, where the term anorexia nervosa became an official classification for the said symptoms of the disorder we had talked about earlier. And then 1979 is bulimia nervosa, and it's deemed as an eating disorder separate from just throwing up for no reason or a medical issue. And it was a disorder that was established by Gerald Russell, a British psychiatrist. And during the 1990s, binge eating disorder is what it's known now, but before that it was called night eating disorder, which is what I talked about before, about how you just kind of eat and it doesn't, like, they didn't really see it as a disorder, just kind of like, oh, you're emotionally like overeating. And it became the term binge eating disorder in the 1990s. And then as of the 21st century, we have gotten a lot of awareness on the treatments that we should be receiving for an eating disorder. But there's still a lot of work to be done about the stigma around it, because I feel like while we do know all of this information about eating disorders, it's ignored somewhat, and I feel like it's very underdiagnosed. A reason why I think it is very prevalent, especially in America, began back towards the end of the 1990s and to the beginning and like middle of the 2000s. So the 2000 standard of beauty was considered wayfish, and that was a very thin, like you had to have a thigh gap and very narrow hips and like no chest area, no hip area, like that. Like you had to be very skinny, very thin, very Victoria's Secret bombshell. Like that was the beauty standard. And to reach this level, like many people do have this body type naturally, as do like different body types, but to reach that level, people, especially young impressionable girls that would be watching Victoria's Secret, would try to reach that level of skinniness because those were the girls that were being promoted as beautiful and out of this world. So trying to get to that point, they would have very, very dangerous methods, which we talk about on the next slide, called impossible standards equals dangerous methods. And it became just a normal thing to struggle with an eating disorder, to try to reach this impossible level of skinniness. Like, I think a size 6 was the minimum to a size 12 was seen as fat, and it was constantly criticized in the media. Like some of the magazines shown here, the titles are Booty versus Bones, talking about beach bodies, and just these people like are not overweight, they're not like, but it was just seen as a need to be super skinny and super thin and to be able to fit through the tiniest cracks in the doors. And different diets as well in television and movies were promoted, as well as these harmful headings in these media platforms, such as that one of Scream Queens, where the girls were all sitting at a lunch table and they're dipping cotton balls into a juice and eating it, and it was seen as a way to fill yourself up without also keeping that slim, like super petite figure, but not realizing like those cotton balls can get stuck in your intestinal tract and stop like your organs. So when we stray away from that very toxic time, we get to a point in the 2010s where a more curvy, voluptuous body is seen as the ideal body type, to try to promote body type positivity, where more people were accepting, like it was cool to have the biggest like hips, like a very hourglass figure. And it was somewhat of a time where people could just kind of be themselves. Like it was still nice to be skinny and everything, but like you could have curves and not worry about what the next person was doing or wanting to look like a Victoria's Secret bombshell, because it was becoming known that it was very toxic to have that kind of body. But then when we get to the 2020s, like where we are currently in America, we are seeing a resurgence of that wayfish, like late 90s 2000s body type, where it is seen to be super skinny with a little sprinkle of the 2010s curviness. But like different trends on social media, because we are in a peak of social media, have been put where AI and things are photoshopping videos to make people's waist thinner, and people are getting plastic surgery or getting Ozempic to become skinnier, and those who supported the body positivity movement are becoming skinnier and leaving that once they get like treatments such as Ozempic to lose weight. And it has become such a toxic time on the internet to be somebody who is of bigger like stature, and the term slim thick is kind of what the ideal body type is right now. And the reason why I think it is becoming more prevalent to have eating disorders such as anorexia and bulimia right now is because we are going back to that 90s kind of like way of thinking about people's bodies and just the way that they look. Is also that the internet is a lie. Like when we look at the internet, we could see somebody who has a waist that's this big with like thing, and like that could be edited. So but when young impressionable girls see that, they just see, oh, I want to look like her, like how do I look like her, and that cycle of abuse continues. So in conclusion, in varying decades there have been in conclusion, this long paragraph and I can expand on it. While varying decades have had varying standards regarding their body type, the general goal is to have a skinnier build. Social media can be altered and everything is not as it appears, but people, especially those who are young and impressionable, might not be able to tell the difference, so they might resort to harmful methods to get this dream body. In my opinion, eating disorders aren't deemed as serious most times until it's too late, as well as binge disorders not being talked about enough. So, in conclusion, I think the reason why this is the most harmful to America today is not only because it has negative symptoms, such as those of the eating disorders that we are talking about now, but I think it's kind of promoted in society today, like very subtly. It's a very judgy, toxic time to be on the internet and on this model thing, such as that of the 2000s. And treatments are available, but it's very hard to access with the healthcare. Like, there are treatments where you can meet with a nutritionist and have inpatient therapy or outpatient therapy and just get that treatment, but it's very hard for people to access that treatment, especially if they struggle with the socioeconomic status, as well as prior discriminations that we had talked about when we were talking about stigma and why those of minorities might not be able to get that support. So I think to reach a proper way to cut down on eating disorders, I think what we as a society need to do is we need to focus on fit instead of fat. I think we need to understand that different people have different body types. There's different genetic factors that go into it. There's different sports that everybody does. So I think what we should focus on is being our healthiest rather than being at our thinnest, because somebody who's really thin might not be as strong as somebody who might be a little bit bigger, but they are strong, they're healthy, they're going to live a happy and healthy life. So I think that is what we need to focus on for the treatment of eating disorders and the prevention of them in the future. But that is my presentation, and thank you for listening.